I would now like to invite Bishop Vincent Long, Bishop of Parramatta and Chair of the Bishops' Commission for Social Justice, Mission and Service. He will offer a few thoughts on this year's social justice statement, which focuses, of course, on domestic violence against women and children. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. And I'm coming to you today from the Darak and Garangara country, where I am in Western Sydney. So good afternoon, everyone. The gospel story we heard earlier underlines how long-standing and deeply ingrained the abuse of power and the use of violence is in the human story. The abuse of power is clearly evident in the way the scribes and Pharisees treated the woman accused of adultery. She was humiliated by being brought before Jesus in public. On the other hand, there is no sign of the man involved being subjected to the same humiliation. Furthermore, the opponents of Jesus are not really interested in holding the accused woman to account for her alleged adultery. The real object of their actions is Jesus. They want to catch him out, and they simply use the woman to do that. She is not treated with respect and dignity at all. Jesus confronts their abusive, disrespectful, and violent behavior, and they go away with shame. In stark contrast to the abuse of power by Jesus' challengers, he shows the woman respect and compassion. Instead of violence and the abuse of power, he offers her understanding, forgiveness, and dignity. He sends her away with gentleness, compassion, and hope. Jesus invites us to do the same in all our relationships, whether private or public. He calls us to relationships founded in deep respect and love. Violence and abuse in our own lives, in the church and society, must be confronted by us Christians today in the same way that Jesus did in the gospel story. Whether it is women, men, or children who experience violence and abuse in society, in the church, and in the home, we are all called to follow the example of Jesus. We must work to cultivate a culture in which violence and abuse of power are simply not acceptable in any setting. The focus of our social justice statement this year, Respect, Confronting Violence and Abuse, is domestic violence against women and children. It is true that men are also the victims of domestic violence, and in no way are we minimizing the seriousness of that violence. But the statistics clearly show that it is women and children who mostly face the trauma of domestic violence. In recent times, we've seen women rising up to the challenge the violence and abuse of power they've lived with for far too long. The marches for justice in cities around Australia in recent years are clearly a sign to us in the church and society that women will no longer tolerate violence and abuse. They want action at all levels of society to end the scourge of violence which oppresses them. The revelations about the sexual harassment of women in our national parliament led to the Human Rights Commission's Respect at Work report. That report made 55 recommendations, and it is welcome that those legislative recommendations are being implemented by federal government. The centerpiece of recently introduced legislation is the introduction of a positive study of responsibility of all employers to prevent sexual discrimination, harassment, and victimization. There's also been much activity at state territory and federal levels to take more effective action to eliminate violence against women and children in the home. Reports initiated by state governments on strengthening laws and providing women and children facing domestic violence with more effective support have been produced. Some state governments have already acted to respond to these reports. A number of governments have, for example, initiated legislative change to criminalize coercive control. This is something I understand our guest speaker, Michael Cher, will speak about shortly. The federal, state, and territory governments have also just released a new plan for eliminating violence against women and children. The report begins with a message from victims and survivors of domestic violence. We all should hear their message and support action which will see the plan's initiatives implemented. We in the Church have a special responsibility to take action and support public initiatives to end violence against women and children. The Royal Commission into Institutional Abuse of Children lays bare the extent of our culpability for sexual and physical abuse of children. Sadly, this abuse also has been experienced by many women and men in the Church. This significant abuse of power by members and leaders of the Church is shameful and scandalous. Many of the victims and survivors of this dreadful abuse continue to live with trauma and poverty because of this abuse. Most of us in the Church live comfortable lives, and it is all too easy to say sorry and feel that we've done what is necessary. We cannot continue to live comfortable lives, ignoring this trauma and poverty which continue to cause pain in the lives of victims. We need to keep listening to victims and to take action with their guidance. We need to accompany them in their struggle for dignity. We need to show them respect and to bear the burden which comes with a genuine commitment to healing. The recent Plenary Council made commitments to victims and survivors of sexual abuse. I am myself committed to ensuring that these commitments are acted promptly and effectively within my sphere of influence. The words of the scribes and Pharisees in the gospel story we heard were cheap and dishonest. Their actions were abusive. We cannot heal grievous wrongs committed by members of the Church also with cheap and dishonest words. We need to ask for God's help to follow Jesus, however uncomfortable and difficult that might be for us. Transformation and healing are not possible unless we embrace a commitment to repentance for the great wrongs that have been done. A true repentance will enable us to take the action that is needed to make things right in the Church's relationships with the victims of sexual abuse. It will also prompt us to offer our support for the many community and government initiatives which aim to eliminate violence against women and children and the culture which sustains it. I'm pleased that many Catholic social service organizations offer vital support to those experiencing domestic violence. That needs to continue and to be extended. I'm also pleased that Catholic organizations such as Australian Catholic Religious Against Trafficking in Humans, or ACRAS, and Jesuit Refugee Services, JRS, are organizing campaigns and actions as part of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which begins today. These are all signs that the Church is taking seriously the problem of violence and abuse, particularly against women and children, and is joining with others in society to take action to end this scourge in our society. I encourage you to read our social justice statement if you haven't done it already, and to be prompted by it, to get involved in the work, to build a church and a society which truly embraces Jesus' example of respect and love. We need to work with people of goodwill in society to end violence and abuse. We need to give our support to many initiatives I have mentioned. This wrong cannot be allowed to continue any longer. I end by quoting the statements from victims of violence in the National Plan to Eliminate Violence Against Women and Children 2022 to 2032. It says, in part, it is time to transform our pain into action. There can be no more excuses that it is all too hard. We don't know what to do. It's too complex. It is everyone's responsibility to end the perpetration of violence against women and children and all victims of gendered violence. So friends, our work for the full realization of God's kingdom in all its aspects remains to be accomplished. The vision and the example of Jesus inspires as we confront both the manifestations and the root causes of violence and abuse. Let's go and make a difference to the church, to the society, and to the relationships, the spheres of our influence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bishop Vincent. That was lovely. Thank you.